give a little brief intro about myself for those people that I don't know. So my name is Anne Clarke, and I've been working in the Abstract family now for 7 years. So I've been working with Mark on many projects. I am one of their lead consultants, so I lead on a number of their programs, which are their talent programs, Accelerate being one of them, and we've got a number of people here on the call that have attended that program, so great to see you back. I lead on their leadership programs, and I also do a lot of coaching for them as well. So absolutely love working with Mark and the organisation. So if you haven't had much dealings with us, look us up and just sort of have a look at some of our library that we've got. But just before I start today, I just want to say, and for those people that know me, they will appreciate this, that in fact, I'm actually extremely aware of feeling like an imposter right now. Kind of like standing here talking to you as some sort of expert, and even that word expert makes me shudder on a feeling that even a few years ago I kind of couldn't even put a name to it. And I suppose if you think about it, that's kind of the point of this, isn't it? And for me, as I said, to extend the invite to some people that I know personally, to my contacts, my friends, that's kind of just another level for me, because in my head, my imposter syndrome is creeping in and says, well, who would want to come and listen to me? Well, I just look now and I see all the people that have come to listen. Well, yes, people do want to come and listen. And I've just noticed Andy Nicol joining us, who is our CEO, so that's making my imposter syndrome go up even higher. But yet I am here today, and I am delivering this webinar as an expert and to you all virtually. Now, who would have thought it? I absolutely wouldn't, because pre-COVID, every single thing that I did was face-to-face. There was no substitute. It was all face-to-face. And I will admit to all of you, there are times now, still now, when I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And internally, I kind of feel, am I skilled enough? Am I experienced enough? Am I qualified enough to just justify being here? But when I always do events like this, I personally enjoy it. I'm really lucky that I've found something that I enjoy doing. And if today just resonates with at least one person, and I say something that somebody can take away as a golden nugget, then it's been worth it. Those of you that know me, you know I like to hear you in the chat, so please use the chat as we go through. Mark and I plan to stop about sort of 10 minutes before, so we'll have some times for some Q&A. But any sort of thoughts, comments, observations on the chat, please do put it in, talk to each other, tell us what your thoughts are. Anything that resonates with you that we say, then please make those comments. Ask questions. Reach out to us afterwards as well. So if we don't get a chance to answer all the questions today, you'll have the contact details for myself and Mark, and we've promised that we'll come back to every single one of you. So ask us questions, reach out if you want to know any further information. So today is still fairly new for us in terms of delivering a webinar on behalf of Abstract, or as an Abstract event. We've delivered loads for clients and sort of various different networks. So please let us know what you think about it today. Give us some feedback at the end, put some comments on LinkedIn, would be really appreciated. And just let us know what you have thought to it. Before we get into any more detail, I'd just like to introduce my colleague today, Mark Fryer, who is one of our directors and co-founder of Abstract. So Mark, do you want to introduce yourself and maybe say a little bit about Abstract?
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Anne. Hi, everyone. And just echo what Anne has said. It's just brilliant to see so many friends of Abstract and some new faces and names as well. So you're very, very welcome. I share the same feelings, Anne. It's a wonderful topic, but my imposter syndrome is probably heightened as we're about to get stuck in. But actually, Anne, we've been fascinated in this topic for a while, and it's about sharing our own experiences and what we've researched and what we've learned. And that's what we hope to do over the next sort of 40-ish minutes or so. I'm commercial director at Abstract. We've been established over 10 years now. We love what we do. We have a lot of fun doing it. Why not? Fun is fun. It also makes it memorable. We want to make the corporate world a better place. Will we do that? Probably not, but we'll give it a good go. I'm based in Ireland, lovely part of the island of Ireland. And as usual, Anne, I'm delighted to be supporting you again on this fantastic topic. So let's go.
Okay. So are you going to share your screen, Mark? If you can.
Yeah, I'm still not that quick at it. So I'm getting there. Here we go.
We say let's go, but this is kind of when Mark and I work together, particularly on this topic, because it's absolutely a topic that I personally really resonate with, and I hope it resonates with lots of people in the room too. And it's a topic that we are passionate about and interested in, and we hope that you find exactly the same. So anybody that's been on any one of our programs to Accelerate, we always start off our programs with this quote from Albert Svent Gorgi. And the quote is about discovery. So discovery is seeing what everyone else has seen, but thinking what no one else has yet thought. And we start all our programs with this. Albert Svent Gorgi is a Hungarian psychologist. And what we want you to think about now in this session is about discovering something new, discovering something different, taking off your old hat or your old lens and looking at it through different eyes. So start to look at imposter syndrome in a different way. So then when it comes to 1 o'clock and you're going to your normal place of work or your normal, but whatever it is you're doing this afternoon, that you're starting to look at things differently. So discovery is seeing what everyone else has seen, but thinking what no one else has yet thought. So let's discover more about what we're going to cover today. So we want to share with you what it is. So what is imposter syndrome, so that you can understand it a little bit more. We want to help you to interpret it. So what does that actually mean to you? So which are the bits that you can relate to? And then finally is almost the so what bit. So we will have a lovely hour together. Well, we will anyway. I hope you do too. So we'll have a lovely hour together. But what's next? How are you going to combat it? And we want to give you some golden nuggets that you can then take away to combat it, to deal with it successfully. And the feedback that we've had from all of our webinars that we do is they're always interesting and always have application. So let's start by actually trying to understand it. So the first thing I want to say is that imposter syndrome is not an illness. Sometimes when you hear that word syndrome, people think, oh, it's an illness and I suffer from it. I almost want to sort of change that terminology. It's not an illness, but it's something that we can all relate to and that we have experienced it. So let's just have a look at the two words of imposter and syndrome. So if we look at imposter, and feel free as we go through, if you want to take any pictures of our slides, then feel free to do so, but we will also be sending out the recording that's available and also the slides, so you can look at this afterwards. So let's have a look at these two words. The word imposter, the person who fraudulently pretends to be someone else. And that word syndrome, it's that combination of signs and symptoms. So it's a feeling or experience that people can relate to. So as I say, don't think of it as an illness. And there's lots of good in these feelings. It's really natural to have it, and other people will feel it too. So it's kind of that unnecessary self-sabotage, almost that voice in the head that sometimes that you can hear. And sometimes if that starts to dominate, it can then create that low self-confidence through the identification of that fear of failure, or the fear of being found out, or that one day that you will get found out or discovered. Now, if that is left to manifest itself, it can then become that constant internal struggle between achieving success and achieving the best that you can possibly achieve, or avoiding being found out. But it's also that psychological pattern in which an individual consistently doubts their accomplishments. So no matter how well they have done, no matter what they've achieved or how many times will people tell them they've done well, they're doubting those accomplishments. And that's quite often without any rational facts. It's that voice in the head again. And it kind of creates that persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. So I just want you to think whether, have you ever felt any of those sort of thoughts or symptoms, and put words in chat if there's any of those that you can relate to. But have you ever worried about being found out, that one day somebody will find you out, that you've maybe doubted your achievements and your accomplishments? Have you ever felt out of your depth or being exposed as a fraud? And if you have, then that's okay, because that means that you too have experienced imposter syndrome. And it can often be traced back to, when you start to think, where does it come from? It can often be traced back to our earlier years in life. And Mark's going to explore that a little bit more with you in a moment. So let's have a look at some common signs that you may see, you may hear, or you may feel if you've experienced it. So the first one is that sort of self-doubt. So if we could just hold it there for a minute, Mark. We won't put them all up in one go. So that first one is that self-doubt. So what's kind of that voice saying in your head? What's it saying about you? Is it helping you or is it hindering you? And kind of, does the volume of that dial, does it need dialing up or does it need dialing down? So recognize it, dial it up when it's being helpful, and dial it down when it's maybe not being so helpful. It's then also that inability to assess your competence and skills, and then maybe attributing that success to other external factors. Now those that know me, and I might have, I think there's some in the room that are from my previous corporate days, is that I spent 23 years in corporate life. And it was in Barclays, in financial services. And the last role that I did was a really senior position. So I was MD of a region. I managed the performance of that region. Now, when I got that job, I was the first female to get the role. I was the youngest person in the role. I then went on to win many awards, yet I would always attribute my success to other people. It was nothing to do with my competence and my skills. It's because I was lucky. I'd got the best team, or clearly I had. I got the best region, the best area. So I was always attributing that success to other external factors. It may be that you sometimes berate your own performance. So sometimes if a day goes particularly well and there's lots of positives that have happened in that day, but maybe one thing has not gone so well, where do you put that focus? Do you focus on the 10 things that have gone really well? Or do you tend to focus maybe on that one that didn't go so well? And then there's that fear that you will not live up to expectations. And I suppose kind of backing yourself more and sort of living up to those unreasonably high expectations of others. And what if you let them down? And I remember, it's a story of when I was only a 10-year-old, so it shows that it still sits with me. But I was top of my class in a spelling test. I got 17 out of 20. I was on a high. I was so elated and excited. I couldn't wait to run home to tell my mum that I'd come top of the class. Her first question was, how many did you get? 17 out of 20. Where was her focus then? The focus then was on that 3 that I got wrong. She never found out that I was actually top of the class. So it's that fear of not living up to those expectations and thinking whether you over or under achieved. I'm the eldest of 5 children, and I kind of felt that I did need to live up to those expectations. I think my next study I might start reading into is a bit around eldest child syndrome, because I think there's definitely something there as well. Also the fact that I left school at 15, so I didn't go to university. So I never felt clever enough. And there for me, that sits my biggest imposter syndrome, sitting right there. And that's when I'm faced with people that I perceive are cleverer, more academic than me. And I'll always remember in my banking days, and people on the call that will always remember this, and I know we've got a lot from financial services on the calls, but I mean, when I got my first director position, I was attending these really senior meetings, and there was all these acronyms being banded around and flying around. Well, I was like a naughty 5-year-old. I started to make notes of them and then find out what they meant afterwards. When I look back now, I think I bet half the room didn't know what those acronyms meant. And if only I dare ask. Or the time when I was interviewing for a HR director, I've got no background in HR. Well, I hadn't at the time. And all the people I was interviewing just seemed so much older and wiser than me. And my greatest fear was to take care not to reveal that I didn't have a degree. So I can kind of recall and recount sort of many situations where I know that imposter syndrome has taken over. And probably one of my earliest memories in my career was when I was promoted from making the tea for Mr. Houghton to answering the phone. And one of the first calls that I got was that somebody asked for accounts payable. And I remember thinking at that point, well, are they asking for money or are they giving it to us? So sometimes that voice in the head can take over, and that self-sabotage can then limit our opportunities. And that directly impacts your confidence. So when your confidence is low, your need for reassurance absolutely increases. But it's okay to be out of your depth sometimes. I frequently am, and I'm sure that we all are. And all I want to say to you is, like, don't freeze it. Just make sure we harness it and turn it into a force for good. It's not that fear of failure that we talked about, or being unable to do it. It's more that sensation of getting away with it, or that fear of being discovered. And at some point, somebody's going to find me out. And sometimes I think, well, if they did, that's fair enough, actually. They might come and, I don't know, wait for the knock on the door and somebody tells me it's all over. If they finally caught up with me, and then I'd have to go and get a proper job rather than doing something like this that I love. But my time might be up. But then I think, well, it hasn't happened yet, but I'm in my 37th, coming up for 38th year of my career. So I haven't been found out yet. So maybe there is nothing to find out. So it's about setting those, whether we set those unrealistic goals and then feeling disappointed when we don't achieve them. So I'll have a look at the chat in a moment. I can see a few people have put some comments in, and that's great because it's really interesting for us to see about any things that people can resonate with, and whether you can relate to some of the things we're talking about. So we've got a first poll here that we'd like to do. And our question on this poll, and Nick's going to launch this for us in a moment, has the research proven that women or men suffer more from imposter syndrome, or is it both the same? And I'm really encouraged to see that we've got a number of men on the call today with us, so I'd be interested to get your views as well. So just while the scores are coming in, do you think it's women, it's men, or is it both the same?
Lots of people relating to the university analogy, Anne, which is good to see in the chat room.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. And it took me a while to, I suppose, appreciate that, yes, I am good enough and my skills and experience will speak for themselves, and I don't need to have that final stamp and qualification to prove that I am good enough. But it's recognizing when that voice then starts to dominate. Okay, so we've got a good number of responses, still waiting for a couple, but I think if we can share the results, Nick. So hopefully you can see that now. So the majority think that it's women. So 75% of you think that women, 6% men, and then we had 6 people saying both the same. So it'd be interesting who came up with both the same, because the perception is that women suffer more than men from imposter syndrome, but actually the reality is it is both the same, but men just don't tend to admit it. So the perception is it's women, but it tends to be both the same. So if you can stop sharing, Nick, and then we can move on to the next slide. And I don't know if any men are happy to take themselves off mute and chip in as to what they think about that thought and what the research says, or I've got my fellow colleague here, Mark, that I will hand over to and get your view on that, Mark.
Kate sounds as though she's at a disco, which is good. So at this point, Anne hands over to a man, and thanks for participating in the poll. We've done this a number of times and the results typically come out in a similar way, and it's just not true. At Abstract, we've been researching this topic for a good while. As you'd imagine, there are lots of people that we interact with, and when we have conversations of its nature, the fact is that men and women suffer from it the same. And as Anne has suggested, men either fake it more or they cover it up more, but it's just not true in terms of women suffering it more than men. I think, interestingly, probably the media portrays it that it's women more than men. But then, do you know what I think where that comes from is because women are strong enough and brave enough to admit to it. And therefore, it's kind of become a slightly distorted point of view that women suffer it more than men. But the research and the facts are it's men and women just the same. And imposter syndrome is a normal feeling. And forgive me for using the term normal, because what is normal these days, and rightly so in this sort of period of greater equality, diversity, inclusion. But I use the term normal to perhaps reference the fact that it's very general, it's very common, and anybody who pursues an ambition, a career, puts themselves out of their comfort zone, in work, out of work, you will have this feeling of imposter syndrome, which was coined in the 1970s in terms of its original origins. So let's have a look a little bit further at it and just try and understand it some more. And imposter syndrome in our adult years causes feelings of anxiety, worry, depression, which can often be traced back to our earlier years in life, because the fact is that the day I was born, the midwife didn't turn around to my mum or dad and say, "I'm really sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Fry, you've got one here with imposter syndrome. You might want to try again." We're not born with it. It kind of comes through in a variety of ways. Maybe a little bit maybe a little bit nature, but a lot of nurture. But I don't want to enter into that debate. But let's just look at a few elements that contribute to this later in life feeling that we call imposter syndrome. Perhaps a family that highly valued or undervalued achievement, pressure or no pressure on children, on ourselves to achieve as we're growing up, a bit like Anne's spelling test there. Or a child who's given certain responsibilities, which actually help maturity, help that sense of responsibility, or perhaps not being given those responsibilities at too early an age. Or maybe that child that's grown up exonerated from responsibilities. And I'm happy to admit publicly to a lot of people I don't know that I came from was brought up by two parents who actually did a great deal for me. So I was privileged in that respect, but I don't think it did me too much good in terms of forming those early appreciation of responsibilities. Parents or elders who project high praise or highly critical, perhaps even at the same time, which was what Anne was referring to there, top of the class, scoring well, but she got one or two wrong. And then the child who's encouraged to engage or disengage in group activities. As a parent, naturally, we can be protective and somewhat overprotective at times of our children, or we perhaps don't, as a child, we're not taking too much interest in terms of the activities that we were up to. And that one particularly plays, I think, maybe perhaps to the nature versus nurture argument. And then finally, tutors or parents who make regular comparisons to one's peers. Now, we're not saying that comparisons are bad, they're not. Comparisons on occasions are actually really, really good, but sometimes they can be bad, and sometimes when they're kind of made by comparing a level of achievement as a child to his or her siblings, for example, you've done well, but you didn't do as well as your brother. And so we wanted to just take a look there to understand it further, that often that feeling that we have as adults can be traced back to those early years and those formative years and through into adolescence. And for those of us on the session today who are parents, gosh, is there any finer example of being an imposter for when you become for the first time a father or a mother. I'm the father of 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. I'm very, very fortunate, but I remember my eldest daughter, the day she was born and the year or 2 that followed, and ever since, really, you just think, I don't know what I'm doing. You know, I'm kind of making this up as I go along, and I'm trying to use as much common sense as I can muster. So, folks, if you take something away today, we're not alone. We all feel this, depending on the situation and the moment in time and what we push ourselves forward to. And what's really interesting, the final point, of course, social media. Love it or hate it. It's there, it's going to be with us. We can switch off to it. But through all the media that is this tsunami that's coming at us, there are naturally comparisons played out, and it's exacerbated by social media. And we've got to be careful about that, not just for imposter syndrome, but for many other reasons besides. But what's really interesting about imposter syndrome, it can be a little bit self-fulfilling. So my example would be, we've got an important presentation coming up, or there's an important meeting coming up in our corporate world. We super prepare, we super rehearse, and the meeting or the presentation goes really, really well, and we perform really, really well. But then this fuels our imposter syndrome, because we then tend to think that to do well, we have to super prepare and super rehearse, and eventually it's going to make us not feel too great. So what we did at Abstract, if we move now into interpreting it, let's try and understand the sort of different characters that appear in our imposter syndrome. And characters is what we felt we wanted to define it by. And so we have come up with 5 different characters that we think cover most feelings of imposter syndrome pretty well. And the really important thing here to take away as well is these characters are positive, because we're optimists and we have faith at Abstract that actually most people in corporate life are trying to do good. I appreciate there's the odd exception that we do come across. And therefore, these characters are strong, positive characters. But if you like, they perhaps overplay their strengths. So what Anne and I do is we'll walk through these fairly quickly. We haven't got enough time to go into great depth today. And we'll want to try and give you a nugget or 2 for each one. So let's have a look at the first one, the perfectionists. And I'm sure many of us can certainly relate to this imposter syndrome character. The symptoms of the perfectionist is they can sometimes be a micromanager. So when they delegate responsibility, the person feels like he or she's then looking over the shoulder to make sure it's being done quite the way the person who delegated the work in the first place would wish it to be done. And of course, they want to feel like their work is 100% perfect 100% of the time. And unfortunately, even when they get close to achieving that or achieve that, success is rarely satisfying. So a little golden nugget, and it's not easy, and it's going to require behavioral change, is push yourself to act before you're ready. Check it twice and send the email off rather than checking it 10 times. And you know, sometimes, it certainly was when I was at school, like Anna didn't go to university, but I believe it's the case, 80% is an A. 80% can actually be good enough. So as Marjorie Worrell, the Australian author and a real big activist on gender diversity, said, you don't have to attain perfection or mastery to be worthy of the success you've achieved. So the next segment is somewhat one I can really relate to. I've done this at times in my career. And these individuals, they often stay late, even past the point when they've completed that day's necessary work. They'll just keep going. And as we know, there's enough work out there just to simply keep going. And unfortunately, the sacrifices they make are personal. They may be hobbies, and their passions fall by the wayside, sacrificed to the work in hand. And they're actually almost just addicted to that sense of purpose of doing work and the validation that comes from working, though not necessarily from the quality of the work itself. And so a golden nugget is start to discipline and create that downtime into recreational development time. and reconnect with your hobbies and your social events. I think it's quite interesting, actually, Anne, that COVID has probably accentuated imposter syndrome in many, many different ways, not just corporately, but also in our personal lives. So I think the last couple of years have certainly not helped this condition that we feel. But very quickly, if I may, just before I hand back over to Anne, a quick anecdote in terms of superhuman. It was 2007, I remember it distinctly. I was in the bank and I had a board meeting down in London at our Drummond's office. And it was the monthly board meeting. It was on a Thursday. And that Thursday morning was my daughter's 7th birthday, my daughter Hannah, who I referred to before. And I was at a real conflict because I had to be at the board meeting. It was important, as they always seem to be. But also I was torn because I knew that I had to be there for when she woke up that morning before she went to school for a birthday. And it was about a week earlier, and I was sharing with a colleague in the bank, and the colleague said to me, do you know, Mark, in 15 years' time, nobody will ever remember what happened at that board meeting. But in 15 years' time, your 7-year-old daughter will know or will remember whether you were there or not when she woke up for a birthday. I still didn't feel torn. I felt torn, but I travelled down later that day to London and rejoined my colleagues at the board meeting. But I was there for Hannah that morning. And you know what? Can't even remember what on earth that board meeting was about. But I knew in the moment I'd stopped being superhuman professionally, and maybe I'd just turned for a moment and was superhuman for my daughter and achieved both. So superhuman, one of our fine imposter syndrome characters.
I love that story, Mark, and I've heard it a couple of times now, but every time I do, it kind of just really resonates, isn't it? That and particularly linking it into that superhuman, and Hannah would absolutely remember, but people at work won't remember that you weren't there. I can really relate to the superhuman. Mine was probably more in my banking days before I had children. And I loved how you then switch at the end to say you've now become superhuman at home instead of work.
Yeah.
I'm loving the chat that's coming through. So Glenn, thank you for admitting and honesty, and Clay, thank you for then also commenting as well on that sometimes people see this as a weakness, and because of maybe how you've been brought up, you don't like to show those weaknesses. So I'm loving it, the fact that we resonate, some of the earlier comments as well. I love the chat that's going on. I'm glad that it's resonating with people. And Sharon, I thought yours was really interesting about how you then sort of link it to your own parenting as well. So my 2 boys are older now, and yes, I want to encourage them and you set high standards, but equally having to be careful about, are we putting some of these sort of views, perceptions, or creating this imposter syndrome in themselves. So I also love it as well when Mark was talking about perfectionist, superhuman. I could see lots of nods going on. So if there's anything we're talking about or any one of these that you can relate to, again, stick it in the chat so we can see that that yeah, you kind of can relate to that one. So now let's have a look at the natural genius. And I sometimes think, Mark, you should have carried on with this one because this is yours, isn't it? The natural genius. So I'll go
I'm the next one. I'm a few of these actually. I am a few of these, but gosh, no, I'm not a genius. But that's my imposter syndrome kicking in.
And that's what you might find as well. I like to refer to these as our 5 friends. So it could be that you maybe relate to a couple in one, a couple of in the other, some in all of them, but there might be one that's a little bit more predominant than others. But as Mark said, even that word genius, to me, I don't relate to this one at all, but I'd be interested to see in the room who we've got that relate to this, whether it's a hands up or chat, but just, yeah, even that word. So they judge themselves based on getting things right first time. So almost like judge their success based on their abilities rather than necessarily the effort that they're actually putting in. So it almost doesn't matter how hard you try, it's more about how good you are. They dislike the idea of having a mentor because they believe they can handle things on their own. So the thought of having someone else to help them, someone such as a mentor, is really seen as a weakness because they can handle this on their own. And they may avoid certain challenges because it's too uncomfortable to try something that they're not already great at. So they might avoid situations because of the discomfort that they might feel in doing something they're not already good at. And we've got a member of our team, Paul, and it seems a silly example, but he always makes me laugh when he shares it. And I know he shared it with a few on the call, that he will not come and play 10-pin bowling with us because he knows he's rubbish at it and he doesn't enjoy it. He says he doesn't enjoy it, but it's because he's not the best at it. Or I sometimes think maybe he's just too concerned that I might actually beat him at something. So when they're kind of not performing well, it provokes that feeling of shame. So I don't know if anybody resonates with that in the room. And here's our golden nuggets for the natural genius. So know that having a bad day does not make you a failure. So we all have bad days, and that's okay. Failure is an event. It's not a person. And as Mark said, we're all work in progress. So try and identify things that you can improve on, and then be okay with that. Push yourself to try things that you're not naturally good at, and accept mediocrity in the first instance. So asking for help is a strength. We're only as good as the people that we surround ourselves with. And that mediocrity word for the natural geniuses in the room, that is very, very painful because they want to be the best. So just looking at the word genius, even though the word genius does make me cringe, I love this quote. It's probably one of my favorite ones that we have at Abstract, from Albert Einstein. So you are all geniuses. Everybody is a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, then it will live its whole life believing it's stupid. And I just love that quote. And at Abstract, we focus very much on knowing what you're good at, know what you enjoy, know what your strengths are, and put yourselves in the right situations that will strengthen those strengths and that will build your confidence. So I love that quote. Let's move on now to the rugged individualist. So symptoms here is asking for help will reveal their phoniness. So they have that overwhelming need to be independent. They refuse assistance to prove their worthiness. And they eventually frame requests for assistance in terms of the requirements of the project rather than their needs as a person. So they kind of need to establish things or accomplish things on their own, and they don't need help from anybody else. And what the rugged individualists will do is, if they want your help, they won't come to me and ask for my help, but they'll say the project needs your help. So you don't need it, but the project needs it, is how they kind of frame those requests. So golden nuggets for the rugged individualist: learn to lead and work holistically. So work with others. Don't always feel you've got to do it by yourself to accomplish like bigger and better things. The sum of the whole is much bigger than each of the parts. And ask for help, but remain responsible and in control. So acknowledge and accept that everyone at some point needs some help. So I can see a couple are relating to that. And Mark, is there anything else from your point of view, being the rugged individualist, that you want to add?
No, I've still not cracked it. I still know the theory, but the reality is that when I turn to my abstract colleagues and say I need a bit of help on this project, I have that feeling inside that I can't do it on my own and somehow I've failed. So, but you know what? I'll wrestle with it for a little while longer. I've still not cracked it, Anne.
Interesting what you said there, Mark. You said, I need help on the project. So it's not you need help, but the project.
Well, maybe I do need help.
Okay. Let's move on to our final friend now, looking at the expert. So if you haven't been able to relate to one yet, this might be the one for you. You'll see from just the words that are coming up there, this is the one that I definitely relate to most. As I said before, children, it was more superhuman, but it's absolutely the expert for me. So the expert, they feel they somehow have tricked their employer into hiring them. They deeply feel exposed as inexperienced or unknowledgeable. So they're constantly seeking out that specialist training, or they want a certificate or more qualifications because they think they need to improve their skills in order to succeed. Even when they've been in the role for some time, they can continue to feel like they still don't know enough. And one day they will get found out. And they shy away from applying for job postings unless they meet every single educational and or competency requirement. And I know I've definitely done this, and I can see a few nods in the room, people saying, yes, they can relate to that one. If I didn't have a really good sponsor that encouraged me to apply for my first director position, I never would have done it, because I didn't tick every single requirement, particularly around the educational requirements. So luckily I had somebody that would back me. Even then, when I was successful, I think, well, why did they hire me? How did I trick them into hiring me? So the golden nuggets here is recognize that you were hired and remained hired for a very good reason. And that's probably because you, or not probably, it's because you were the right person for the job. And if you haven't been exposed by now, then there may be nothing to expose. So any that are relating to the experts in the room, back yourself for that next big thing, but be careful what you wish for. Acknowledge you may have all of the qualifications and skills that you need for now. You don't need to do any further studies. And accept that on occasions you are the expert in the room, whether you like having that title or not. So these are our 5 friends that we want you to now think about, and they all have a part to play. So harness them, turn them into kind of that force for good. And you may, as I said, you may have a combination for all 5. There might be a couple that you particularly relate with or resonate with, but if you could choose just one, which one do you most relate to? And Nick's just going to launch our second poll now. While the scores are coming in, please feel free to put any comments in the chat about your thoughts, comments, observations of ones that resonated with you, any particular parts. And we'll see whether the normal popular ones come up again, Mark, whether it's the same top 2.
Well,
we've got quite a range, actually.
We have, just whilst we're waiting there, I saw a comment from Claire, and he's quite right. I should have made the point that the reason that men probably don't admit to it or cover it up is because of the stereotype alpha machismo kind of portrayal of a male individual. I think Claire's absolutely spot on. That is changing, though. There's no question about that. It's changed and it's changing. So, but Claire makes a great point. Yeah. Okay, Nick,
really
I think
comments, and Catherine, I really appreciate your honesty in sharing your comment too. There is kind of that perception, because you're in financial services, that there's that link with well, you must be good at numbers then. So yeah, keep those comments coming in. I'm loving the chat and seeing that. Okay, so you can see the results there. So we have 44% in the expert camp with me, Mark. It doesn't mean that anyone is right or wrong. The 2 that tend to come up, sort of not most popular, but with the clients we work with, tends to be perfectionist and expert. But we can see we've got quite a range throughout all of them. So 22% perfectionist, 11 superhuman, 15 natural genius, 7% rugged individualist. Yeah, interesting. 44% expert. Okay.
Thanks, Nick.
That, Nick.
That's good. I mean, thanks. Thank you, Anne, and thanks for participating. That was it's always helpful, R&D for abstract, just to appreciate the spread. And don't be at all alarmed, of course, if you think I can relate to all 5 of the blinking characters, because of course that's entirely normal as well. Yeah, absolutely.
So, but even successful people experience imposter syndrome. They experience it too. It doesn't go away. I kind of assume that successful people didn't feel like frauds, and I now know from all our research that we've done that the opposite is true. So it's not a weakness, as we were just talking about. It's not about trying to conquer it, but more about being aware of it. And when you look at this quote here from Sheryl Sandberg, who is a CEO at Facebook and has written the fabulous book Lean In. If anybody hasn't read it, then I'd highly recommend it. There are still times when I wake up and there are still days when I wake up feeling like a fraud and not sure I should be where I am. And so she even has doubts herself privately. And I think for all of us, we just need to remember we all have talent, we're all capable, and we absolutely are all enough, and we belong. So let's just have a look at a video where Sheryl is being interviewed by the lovely Oprah Winfrey, and they're discussing imposter syndrome. Quality is not great, but please listen to the message.
So did you teach yourself to lean in, or was there a moment where you said, I'm going to go for it?
I teach myself to lean in all the time. I still have to remind myself. I think one of the most important things and lucky things that happened to me was when I was in college, I heard this speech on feeling like a fraud. So I heard a speech. It was an honor society reception of all things. And they gave a speech feeling like a fraud. It was how every time you take a test, you're about to fail every time. And I am sitting forward, nodding my head. This is the best speech I've ever heard. I'm sitting next to my roommate who, even if I didn't know I was good, she was the best lit student our college ever had. And she's nodding her head and I'm watching, why are you nodding? And then we go to the reception, it was all girls at this thing. Then we go to the mixed boys and girls reception. And I told my friend, a friend of mine, about the speech. And he just I was like, yeah, I heard this great speech about failing like a fraud, how you always, you always feel like you're going to fail every test. Expecting him to, and he was like, why would that be interesting? And it was this aha moment of women more than men. Men feel like frauds too. It's not unique to women, but the imposter syndrome, which is what they call it.
Yes.
It's just more common for
women. They know
women.
how to fake it.
And it's more common for women.
Mm-hmm.
So when a man's successful and a woman's successful, if you ask him why, he owns it. It's because of my things, what I did, what I know, my skills. A woman will attribute her success to luck and help from other people and working hard, not her own skills. And even if you're confident enough to own your own success, the world will attribute your success for most of us.
Yes.
To luck. You may have noticed this, and working
hard.
Oh
my gosh.
Right? I mean,
we cut it there yesterday, didn't we, Anne? Because opera suddenly launches into opera, and we didn't want to put you through that. But there's a lot of key messages there, and Cheryl obviously is an incredibly successful billionaire and philanthropist, as well as CEO of newly named Meta Platforms, formerly Facebook. But a lot of the sort of incredibly successful person there relating with the messages that we've been referring to today. So just to take us through the final element, and I'll move at pace so that we just can allow a few minutes for anybody who wants to make a further comment, question, or we can pick up on the chat room. But I want you to think about this in terms of equality, diversity, inclusion. Research suggests that imposter syndrome is significantly more prevalent within less represented groups in the workplace. And so just imagine if there is somebody from within the 9 protected characteristics that we know in terms of ED&I, or you yourself are possess one of those characteristics or more than one of those characteristics, then this can actually go some way to explaining that further feeling of imposter syndrome, whether you're the oldest person in the room, the youngest person in the room, whether you're the only male in the room, the only female in the room, whether you're the only white person in the room, the only black person in the room. There's a lot of complexity here. But the good news is, and we are seeing this increasingly in corporate life, is that there are, and socially as well, efforts to improve equality and diversity, which are expected to help reduce imposter syndrome symptoms dramatically. So if there's a call to arms for us all, is, as Sue Liebird, our non-exec director, would often remind us, it's no good just being allies, Abstract. You have to be active allies. So let's get involved in these conversations and make a difference in terms of the corporate world. So we said we were going to combat it. So I'm going to give you the 8 nuggets that will help you combat imposter syndrome. I suppose there's 9, because the 9th being that you attended today. But here we go. First of all, talk about your feelings. You'll know the phrase, problem shared is a problem halved. But do you have a mentor or a close friend or that person you can talk to share how you're feeling in those moments? Because I suspect many of you will do, but you'll also find it'll be reciprocated, and the person you're sharing it with will also be able to empathize and relate precisely to how you're feeling in regards to imposter syndrome. And of course, reciprocate, be a mentor to others. A mentor relationship is not just one way, it is a 2-way avenue. And actually you'll find a lot of common areas, a lot of common ground. Feedback, so simple. But don't just seek it on everything, seek it on the good stuff. When you know it's gone well, seek the feedback and actually make your strengths stronger. Anne's referred to this earlier about setting unrealistic goals. We're big believers in marginal gains. Make those 1 degree changes in terms of behavioral change this week, because in 12 months, the cumulative effect will be significant, but don't try and do it all in one foul swoop in too short space of time. Challenge that inner voice, that inner imposter syndrome character, push through that comfort zone, because do you know what? The theory of the fear is a lot greater than the reality when you get there. And stop comparing. This should say all of the time, because I do think comparisons on occasions are good, but stop comparing all of the time. And whilst we can moderate social media, let's just step back and contextualize it, appreciate it for what it is and what it is not. And that actually there are inappropriate comparisons and there are appropriate comparisons, but moderation actually prevents the tsunami that we're exposed to. And refuse that inner character for a moment and push through and act and tackle that that character of the 5 that Anne and I have taken you through. If you do these 8 things, you will not fail to make progress, but you can fail to carry out these 8 nuggets. So there we are at the end of our session. We said we'd understand it, and we said we'd begin to interpret it, where it's come from, how it affects us through the different characters at play, and then finally some key takeaways in terms of combating it. Anne said already, we're delighted to hear from you. This is a bit of a turbocharged double espresso shot in the arm session, covering the most fascinating and deep topics, and we can go a lot deeper still. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. We'd love to hear if you needed some further help and assistance within your business. I'm going to stop screen sharing in a moment, so we would like to move to hearing your thoughts, your comments and your observations, but so I'm not screen sharing backwards and forwards. I'd just like to bring your attention to 2 future events in the very near future, both hosted by Andy Nicol, our CEO. The first one is next Thursday, March 10th, the Bag of Aspirations. Andy's hosting that to celebrate International Women's Day in conjunction with Sue Liebert, our non-exec director. And then, excuse me, losing my voice. On March 22nd, at the end of the Six Nations, Andy will be on reflecting with his friend Martin Johnson in terms of the tournament itself, but a reflection on some of the leadership qualities that they identified in the running into the tournament. So a couple of events coming up there in the abstract calendar. But back to today's imposter syndrome. We've not got as much time as we thought, Anne. We got carried away as we usually do, but let's stop sharing. If there's anybody who'd like to come off mute and offer a comment, a thought, a question, and overcome that imposter syndrome voice in your head, we'd be delighted to hear from you. And whilst I pause for a moment to allow anybody to do that, I'll just have a look at the chat room.
Will I give it a go, Lynn? Or Lynn, I was going to say Anne, sorry. I see Lynn there as well. I firstly want to say thank you so much. It's been excellent. I've obviously been on a few of your courses and it's always superb. Everything you said reminded me, the last time I did one of your courses a few years ago, so everything you said to me today has reminded me again of all the things I need to start working on again to improve, because you're right, the last 2 years has really increased it, I think, for everybody. And so, yeah, it's nice to be reminded, and this course has really impacted me again, where I now know my homework and what I need to do and go away and take away. And secondly, I did vote for both male and female. I have been quite conscious of my work here. I've been on teams of mostly male, and one team I would have thought, no, it's definitely a female concern. And actually on my new team, I'd say it's very balanced, and the males I work with are very open about it. So it's actually really lovely to see that it's not just women.
Brilliant, Grace. Thanks. Lovely insights. And there's hope for us men then. We're finally admitting to it. So thank you for sharing that. I can tell you've been on a program with Anne now when you mentioned homework and things like that.
Oh, and thank you, Grace, for taking yourself off mute and contributing.
Yeah.
When we first met, that's not something that you would have done. And it's fantastic to see that you've come along and that you then sort of listen to some of the things we talked about before. You know it, but it's that balance of knowing it and doing it. So I really do appreciate those feedback and the comment, Grace, and thank you very much for attending today.